head of product development here. And I'm also the head of product development here, and I'm also a volunteer grassroots coach, and have been doing that job for 7 years. So I'll share an awful lot of common ground with people on this call. You might be starting your journey out, and congratulations for taking the plunge and volunteering your time or giving your time to the children who are participating in this game, because without the volunteers, without the coaches, the game just wouldn't exist in the way that it does. And it's really important that we kind of give ourselves a pat on the back for that. I've got on the call with me Lee Fletcher, who's our head of content at the Coaching Manual. He's heavily involved in creating the articles that are on the site, the videos that we create, and also heavily involved in the strategy for the business. So as we introduce ideas around how we can support recreational soccer, or how we can support competitive or professional soccer, then Lee brings a huge amount of experience into that role to ensure that the business and that the product is giving people what they need at this time. So this evening's presentation is going to focus on the match day experience for what we call foundation phase players in the UK. The foundation phase terminology is spreading all over the world, so it might also be something that's used in parts of Massachusetts. But essentially, foundation phase deals with children who are starting out in the game up until the age of about 11. So the foundation phase is probably, for me, the most important stage for soccer development, because it's at that stage when we give children the chance to fall madly in love with this game. If they get a good experience, if they learn the game properly, then all of those things that we tend to focus more on, like fun and enjoyment, they will happen organically as a result of children having a good experience with their coach, and most importantly, learning the game. The foundation phase, we deal with predominantly technical development. So there's a simple equation that we use at the Coaching Manual, which is that technique comes first. Children have to have sound technique in order to play the game. If they can't pass, control, dribble, or shoot the ball, then they will struggle to do any of the more complicated things that come after. After technique, we look at the principles of the game and the laws of the game. So what are the constraints that the game places on the players because of the laws? And what are the given principles that allow the game, a penetration game like soccer, to work? Principles include things like width, depth, penetration, pressure, or pressing, as you might have heard. So the principles are split into attacking and defending principles. I won't go into detail, that's for another conversation. So kids have to learn the techniques, then they have to understand the laws, and then they learn the principles. Only once they've got that stuff done, and this is really where the foundation phase focuses, do we then start to worry about teaching children tactics. Unfortunately, lots of models are flipped upside down, and tactics is something that coaches want to teach first because they want to teach tiki-taka or they want to teach gegenpressing. So that's a simple kind of philosophy that we have at the Coaching Manual. Make sure they can do it, make sure they understand how the game works, then we can start to teach them the strategies that will help them win the game. This evening's presentation fits into the foundation phase around probably the most important day of the week for a young player, which is match day. It's the most important day of the week because it's the day that all children look forward to the most, when they get to pull on their jersey, when they get to go on the field with their friends, and when they get to compete against other people. We have an article which I've put in the chat box, which is the condensed version of the presentation that Lee's going to give. Now you can click on the link in the chat box and you can sign up to the Coaching Manual for free to access the match day article. You won't need to pay, you can just sign up and then you'll be able to read through the article after we've had the conversation. If there are any questions as we go through, then I'll be on hand to provide help and support with questions. We've done this presentation a number of times, so I'll have the answers as Lee walks through it. So if you want to ask, please use the chat box to do that. I really hope you enjoy the presentation tonight. I hope it gets you to think about what you do on match day, how you lead up to match day, and how you reflect on match day. And if any of the things that we say are don'ts on match day and you are actually doing them, then don't worry, because we've all done the things that we're trying to kind of help coaches understand through this presentation. There is no right and wrong way for most things in soccer, but we have to make sure that this match day experience leaves children feeling fulfilled and feeling like they're part of something that's bigger than them. And that's what soccer really is. It's something that is shared by children all over the world, and it's the world's biggest game for the simple reason that when done properly, it's the most enjoyable thing. And I speak from experience because I've been playing it all my life and still turn out, even though I can't really run anymore, but some would argue that was never the case anyway. So I'm going to hand over to Lee. Lee's going to talk through the match day presentation. Any questions, ask me in the chat box, and I'll be more than happy to help.
Thanks, Terry. Can you hear me all right, Tez? Just conscious of these headphones. Yeah, brilliant. Just to reiterate what Terry said there, thank you very much for joining us. It is a pleasure to be able to present, across the pond. So even though it's quite late, I'm quite excited to be able to show you what we kind of do at the coaching manual and some of the thought processes around this. I won't kind of touch too much on what Terry said about the foundation phase, but that will be a continuous theme throughout this presentation, as that's what it's about, particularly. So obviously there are some of the things that cross over. So if you are coaching older players, 100% some of these concepts and ideas do cross over. So don't feel like this doesn't apply to me, because believe it or not, I coach an open age team. I also coach in a Premier League academy now, so we're younger players, so they do cross over and absolutely have effect across the board. So I'm going to start the presentation, and like Terry said, if you do have any questions, please feel free to ask, and I'll be on hand after as well if you want to speak to me specifically as well about any of the ideas that we've discussed. So match day. This is some tips and some ideas for young players basically developing the game. And like Terry said, I think it's really important that we reiterate that this is kind of the most important part of the day. So hopefully this presentation will give you some ideas or just solidify some of the things that you're already doing. And I want to kind of start with this quote. So Martin Hunter is a UEFA Pro licensed tutor, worked at Southampton as a technical director, worked within the England setup as well. He's been fortunate to take a lot of coaches that you're now seeing in the Premier League through their pro license. So the likes of Stuart Pearce, who's assistant manager at West Ham at the moment, for example, and the likes of Steve McLaren as well, who was formerly with England. And I think this quote resonates with me. And I think if you take anything away from it, this will probably be the first and one of the main things as well, is that the match day experience is the highlight of the week for the players. Players love training, they love playing with the ball and all those other things, but ultimately they do want to compete and they do want to play against other teams. And it's our responsibility as the coaches, as a parent or even a guardian, to create that environment for them. So just bear that in mind whenever we approach the Saturday or the Sunday or even a Wednesday evening, when you're going coaching or taking your team to that match day, this is the quote that you'll take with you. And I can't say it any better than what Martin's already said. And this kind of links to my next point. So in the UK, and no doubt across in the US as well, there's some safeguarding that we need to do with players. So for example, you might have to do a safeguarding certificate before you'll actually be able to coach any players of a minor age, under the age of 18. And not only in football, but in general society, we in the UK, we use something called ACEs. And ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. Now, honestly, this relates mainly to adverse experiences that are of a potential major situation. So, for example, abuse and things like that. But what we can do is we can relate this then to a football context. So not as serious as that, and even though you should be aware of that in your safeguarding, but it's something that we can relate to from a football context. And the reason why we say that is because the experience that you're giving your players on a day-to-day basis, whether that be in training, before training, after training, in games or match days like we're going to talk about today, then all those experiences affect later life. So if we're giving bad match day experiences in this presentation, then how are they going to be able to run their own sessions or play football in the future? So it's something that we have to be mindful of these particular experiences that we're giving children. And specifically what Terry said within a younger age group. So there was a very interesting study done by the University of Harvard about the ability to be able to adapt to different circumstances and when we can adapt the best. So we actually use this particular graph as well for technical development. So this isn't only for the match day experience, it is for what do we need to do to be able to make good football players. So if we know that the foundations are, especially with technical development and any experiences that we're giving our children, that they are more inclined to soak something in at a very younger age, to take that into a later date, then that is something that we need to consider. Now we can use that across the board. So for example, playing an instrument or playing, learning how to ride a bicycle, anything like that can be affected by this particular graph. So we do know in this study that the brain's ability to change and respond to experiences is quite high. So obviously, if we're giving adverse experiences to these children at a very young age, then how are they going to take that into their later development at 16, 17, 18, even into their 30s and 40s, like Terry said, he's playing now. So the brain's ability to change and respond to those experiences is quite high. And as you can see, it starts to dip almost immediately. And you'll know that if you've got children of yourself, those early experiences, those copycat moves, they'll do something that you want to do. There's been an unfortunate case with Kurt Zuma at the moment. And there was a child involved in that in terms of social media. So there's a kind of vacuum of what are we giving our children, what experiences are we giving to our children from a very early age. And what we do know is that the amount of effort it takes to change that particular experience gets harder, more difficult as the time goes on. So again, if we relate to passing, like Terry said, if we're not using that at a very young age, or if we're not learning how to do that particular technique, it's likely at 30, 40, 50, or even in your 20s, it's going to be more difficult for you to learn that technique. Now, if we take that back to the match day experience, we know that in this particular window, all these opportunities for us to be able to give a good match day experience are extremely vital in the foundation phase. So this is the opportunity that it gives us. It gives us that the maximum attention of a player, and also the amount of effort for us to be able to change. So if we get it wrong one week, it's okay, but can we rectify it for a later week? Now that's just to kind of set the scene of these match day experiences, and just to tell you why they're so important. So we've got a real exciting window of opportunity, like I said to you before. So the foundation phase and the playing squad management. So obviously, as a coach, as a parent, you have a lot of responsibilities when you get to the field, and especially on a match day. But from us and our coaching experiences, we know that we need to facilitate a few things within the foundation phase. And these three are kind of key, not only for the player, but for us as coaches as well, and organise. So the first things first is that we need to try and give all players at least 50% game time. Now, for me, that is irrelevant of ability. We have to give them an experience, as we said before, that is positive. And we can only do that and allow them to practice their techniques and the training that you've been doing if we're giving them sufficient game time. And that's if you're winning 10-0 or if you're losing 10-0, it shouldn't matter. You should always attempt to give your players 50% game time, no matter what. The second thing is obviously how you divide that time. Now, you might not play 80 minutes, you might only play 60 minutes, you might play 90 minutes. However you slice it is entirely up to you. However, what we will say is that it needs to be organized and structured, and we can get away with this at the foundation phase because we're more likely to be more flexible within our time scheduling rather than, for example, some of the things that you might have in the later years of football where substitutes are, the non-roll on, roll off, for example. Once you make a substitute, that's it, it's done. At this particular age, we have the opportunity sometimes, and I hope in your area as well, where you can manage the time a little bit better and get them to play maybe the first half of the first half and then the second half of the second half, or vice versa, whatever you want to do, but manage your time effectively to be able to give that 50% game time. And then lastly, it's the management, and it's your responsibility as a coach to manage this game time and oversee it and how you plan it out. So it becomes a part of your weekly schedule. It isn't just match day, we turn up and then we play. It's part of your weekly planning. So if you're planning these sessions and you're doing a diligent job, are you then planning for your match day to get these three components out? Are you taking responsibility to be able to give 50% game time to your players? So we're going to look at a few things, but the first thing that we need to remember is there has to be a consistency, and there's 6 different elements to this to be able to give a good training session and also a match day experience. So we must consistently deliver this throughout our practices and, like I said, your match days. So the first thing is it safe? So safety is massive, whether that's safeguarding, whether that's the safety of the field, the safety of the players. Maybe you've got an excellent player, but maybe they're carrying some kind of injury and you want them to play, but is it safe for the individual to actually play? So you have to consider every single safety when you're turning up to match day. Is it safe for the players to play or participate? The next thing that we're looking at is sweating. So even in your training sessions, are they sweating? Does it look like they're working hard, in brackets? Are they in a position to be able to exert some energy, run around, and ultimately enjoy themselves? And that comes now to the next one, smiling. So if they're smiling, generally you've done a good job. If you can tick 3 of these boxes and sweating, smiling, and learning 100% with safety, then fantastic. Are they smiling? Are they enjoying themselves? Next, are they learning one new thing? Now, for me, this also relates to the match day experience. So everything that we'll talk about later on in the presentation is about learning and about gaining knowledge. And if we talk about that window of opportunity that we discussed before, then are they taking something away from that game? And again, we'll talk about how we can do that in the match day experience. Next, are they looking forward to the next game? Are they looking forward to the next session? Are they so giddy that they can't actually wait to be able to start again? Do they want to start again that night? Do you generate as a coach that type of feeling every time you train or every time you play a game? So are they excited? Are they looking forward to it? Are they learning something? Do they feel like they're progressing? And that's a general byproduct of the first 4. So if you get the first 4 right, generally the next one will follow. And then the 6th one, which is something that we often forget about, is it a pleasant journey no matter what the result? So are we communicating with our parents that the journey on the way home is vitally important for them no matter what has happened? And again, are they ticking these boxes? Are they making sure they're safe? They've sweated and working hard and got a good physical workout? Are they smiling? Are they learning something new? Are they looking forward to it? And then from there, the journey home will be pleasant no matter what. So these are the 6 components that we'll always look at in every single session that I deliver, especially to youth players and to any player, to be fair. And this is something that you should also be figuring out. Are we ticking all these boxes? And this is a continuous cycle, so it never, ever stops. So some of the things that we'll be talking about today. So the key areas to consider. So the first one is establishing a match day code of conduct. So whenever we approach a new season, we need to be discussing what is the code of conduct within our club. So it could be a personal code of conduct also. However, what is the agreed conduct within on the side of the field? So are they parents shouting and screaming? Are you shouting and screaming? Is there a time, a punctuality code of conduct that you need to look at? Is there a dress code of conduct? Various different things. At the foundation phase, what I've always experienced is the link between the parents and the club is extremely vital here. So how does that code of conduct? And secondly, is it being adhered to throughout the season? So it's not something that we'll look at the beginning of the season and only do for 5-6 games. Is it something that we're doing throughout the season and consistently as well? And that could be any particular code of conduct, like I said, within your club or your personal code of conduct that you have an agreement with the players. Training them prior to match, and I'll discuss a little bit more about that. But how are you linking training with the matches? And we'll discuss, like I said, what we're doing, when we're doing it, and most importantly, why we're doing these particular types of training to be able to develop the players. And this is something that Terry said before: is if we think about the technical development of a young player and about how they mature into a soccer player, what are you teaching them to be able to execute on the game? If you're talking about running all the time, or fitness, or tactics, as Tess mentioned before, then are they taking that to the training field? And that might be the case that they are. They might be excelling groups. There might be players that are exceptionally brilliant, and you'll be able to move faster to tactics and principles of play. But ultimately, if they're not doing the things that you required in training, how can we test that within a match day as well? Use of appropriate language and simple language, and we'll talk about that shortly. A warm-up, what does a warm-up look like? And then lastly, more observation, not lots of information. So for a coach, there are three main things that you need to consider as a coach. The first one is your knowledge. So your knowledge around a particular topic. Now, this could be, especially for the foundation phase, technical development. Do you know the full technical framework? Do you know the 13 parts of the body that you control the ball with, for example? Do you know why you're using ball mastery? So that knowledge there is your ability to be able to consume knowledge and pass and transfer that on. However, we can't do that if we're not observing and looking. Now, if I'm talking, I'm not observing, okay? So observation skills and communication skills come hand in hand. And that is the real master of a coach. And that's no different from a match day experience as well. If you're talking all the time, if you're shouting, all these other things, then you can't be observing what's actually going on. So it's really important that you always remember your observation and your communication skills are all hand in hand. And those three different pillars that you're having as a coach will take you to where you want to be as a coach in your personal development also. Other key factors that you need to consider: giving players key factors, especially within the breaks and stoppages, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when it's applicable. Feedback to the players is vital, and I would also say to the parents as well. Is your communication skills good enough to give concise feedback to every single player? Are you giving information that is relevant to them at that particular time? Okay, so there's a common theme, especially within coaching, where we give information based off what we see, but is it vital and linked to the player at that particular moment? And I'll give you an example. If you're consistently talking about, I don't know, getting wide, for example, and opening up the field and linking them to the principles of play, but your player can't control the ball, which is the relevant piece of information that I need to discuss? Now, they might be tied together and linked together, but there are simple processes that we can talk about where we maybe just focus and feedback on what we're talking about, and that could be again linked to the training session. So we've been talking about receiving this week. What are the receiving skills? What did you do well? What did Terry do well, for example? And that feedback has to be extremely specific and vital. It is vital for the player. The staff roles, which we've already discussed briefly. So who takes responsibility within the match day experience to decide on substitutes, for example? Is it the coach? Is it your volunteer coach? Is it your assistant coach? It could be anybody, but somebody needs to take responsibility for that. Equal playing time, which we've already discussed. And then bad weather. Now, if you're like me and living in West Yorkshire in England, then bad weather is a massive factor to this. We don't always plan for bad weather because we feel like it's something that is what we can't control. However, it is a controllable, and the player's safety is extremely important to that. If it's freezing cold and you're keeping a player on the bench, which then relates to substitutes for the best part of 70 to 80% of that game, is that player safe? That's the question that you need to remember. Or too hot? Are they making sure that they're hydrated? So all these other factors and things that you don't always consider do come into the foundation phase and any other part of that. And they are things that you need to consider for the areas. So let's look at pre-game then. So there are 5 key factors that we look at with pre-game. Training. So whenever you design your sessions, and I appreciate I can't see you because I'm actually looking at the presentation at this particular moment, but if you look at any club, there might be some form of curriculum that is given to you in your club. And that curriculum, especially in the foundation phase, might have a theme each week. And each week that theme, in our belief at the coaching manual, should be a technical theme. Okay. As you get older, you get to the principles, and then you get to tactics and philosophy and things like that. However, we just focus on the foundation phase for now. If we look at every single training week has a specific theme. So for example, passing, receiving, turning, shooting, crossing, all these other themes that we're looking at and what the technical requirements are for that. Then in your pre-game brief to the players, are you discussing the things that you're working on at training linked to that match day? So I would not do anything other than at the foundation phase specifically, give objectives and targets for the players to be able to practice those things in matches that I've worked on in training, irrelevant of what I've done 3-4 weeks ago. So for me, when we're just getting out of the foundation phase and we're building ourselves up, we're purely focusing on that week and saying, okay, this week we did receiving. So I want you to show me what you've been doing in training in this particular match. As the players perform that, you can start to link in your passing and your other things. And obviously, once you start to build that curriculum and that bank of content that you've been delivering to the players, you can then start to link multiple themes together. But if we just particularly start on one, and specifically that particular week, it will help the players develop, and most importantly, give you a measurable objective for the players. So did we do passing and receiving well this week? Yes. What did we do well? How did we do it? And you'll be able to answer and start to generate and create questions for the players to be able to feed back to, which we'll discuss shortly. So training is very, very important in this particular pre-game foundation phase match day. As it said before, giving the players 1 or 2 things or factors to focus on. So again, linked to your training, what we've been working on, passing and receiving, those are your factors that you're working on today. And this is what I want you to focus on in the game. Irrelevant of the score, irrelevant of how we perform, are we developing our technical abilities and be able to perform them in match day and pressure situations, because even at this young age, they are pressured. They put a lot of responsibility and pressure on themselves. But by just giving them a couple of pieces of information, 1 or 2, not overloading them with information, they'll be able to perform and really focus on what they need to do at hand. And again, that gives you a clear identity of how to measure that as well. So focus on a few things, not many things. Oh. The warm-up. and I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about this in the next slide, but the warm-up is a massive part of the pre-game, and I'll explain a little bit more in the next slide. Observation. As I said before, observation equals better information. We know this. If we're asking the players to perform one or two technical components of the particular match based on training, and then we're not observing that, then how can we provide any feedback to the players at all? So it's important that you're observing, and specifically players individually. So you might have players that, for example, are excelling. So their key factors might be different from one other player. Now, in football terminology, and especially in the UK, we call that differentiation. So are you giving one piece of information different from another? So you could have a 7v7 game, for example, and 7 different players might have different objectives. So we're doing group objectives maybe based on training, or are we doing individual objectives for each player? And it's up to us as coaches then to observe that and say, hey, Terry, for example, what were your objectives within the game? They were passing and receiving. What did you do well in your passing? What did you do not so good in your passing? And again, in your structuring your questions, it's really important that you start with the positives first. That kind of releases endorphins for the players, makes them feel good about themselves, and then you can use what you wouldn't say the progressions, so the things that they can do better, not the negatives, the things that they can do better. So always lead with the positive and then finish on what they could do better. Then simple language. There is so much terminology in football at the moment, and the reality is that language is being changed and manipulated, sometimes for the better, other times not so much. But the reality is that we need to give simple language to our players, and most importantly, that they understand. So if you're talking about gegenpressing or, positional play or whatever terminology you've picked up through your education, and you can't transfer that information correctly to the players, then you're just creating a minefield of ideas and different misconceptions what the player might not understand. So for us, based on your knowledge of what you have, can you translate that into a simplistic manner? And I think it was Einstein who said, if you can't explain it in simple terms, it means that you don't understand the topic enough yourself. And I think that's true in football as well. So if you're talking about simple information, simple words that the players understand, and based on the technical development, based on their principles of play, that will allow them to go and execute and prepare for the game. So, warm up. For me, and this is my personal preference, I don't think a warm-up should be more than 20 minutes. That's my personal preference. I've seen coaches deliver 40 minutes warm-ups. I've seen them deliver 30-minute warm-ups. I've seen an hour and 15-minute warm-ups. It's entirely up to you as a coach, but you just have to bear in mind fatigue. Are they spending too much time outside? Does safety come into a factor? Is the weather bad? Would you really want players out in the cold and wind or snow or whatever you're playing in for 40 minutes? Also, we can tell by physical activity that generally the average time a player needs to warm up is around 19 to 23 minutes. That's a study that we found. So that is an optimum time for me, 20 minutes. Can you do exactly what you need to in 20 minutes? Now, in my environment, the players, so for example, if we kick off at 1 o'clock, the players would come out at past, and then they will go back inside at 10 to. So that 20-minute window needs to be treated with maximum respect because it isn't a long time. So with that in mind and a maximum respect, you need to prepare your warm-up like you prepare your session. Your warm-up is a micro session. It isn't a warm-up, it's a session, okay? So if you think about all the key components that you do in a warm-up, in a session, then you should be looking at those in a microcosm in that 20 minutes. So prepare and plan like a session. So I would have written notes, This is what we're going to do for X amount of minutes. This is what we're going to do for the next, and so on and so forth. Next, let the players get a feel for the ball, and especially in the foundation phase. And by the way, like I said, I coach an open age team, so adult football as well. And I still do this. Now, get a feel for the ball could be that every player has a ball. If you have the opportunity to do that, or if you have the equipment, so do you have 10 balls? Bring them all to the match. Let them be on the ball. They could be doing ball mastery. They could be doing juggles. There's a great video of Maradona, when he played for Napoli, and he's doing all these juggles and warming up and great exercises, but also physically demanding for them. So they're stretching the muscles, the calf muscles, all these different things, but can be done with a ball. So I would personally like to see a warm up that gets the balls out early doors, get a feel for the ball. And again, if you're looking at passing and receiving, can you link that into getting a feel for the ball? So maybe you have 10 players, maybe it's 2 or 3 balls, and the balls are passing in between each other in an area. So get a feel for the ball, get a touch on the ball, because that's only going to help them in the game. Getting a feel for the ball and being able to manipulate it and receive it and control it and pass it is going to be a big impact for them in the game, rather than potentially not having on the ball and running for 5-10 minutes before they actually get to the actual ball part. And this leads me on to my next point. I don't apologize, and I do apologize if you're using lines already, but personally, lines are a no-go. Do not use lines. So if you get into the older age groups, you can use lines. So what I mean by lines is 3 or 4, maybe 5 players behind each other doing some form of stretching or running to cone to cone. But in the foundation phase, there should be 0 lines. And I would also debate whether there should be lines in actual open age football as well. So all the way up to whether it'll be the elite game or the open age grassroots game. And there's 2 reasons for that. First, it's boring. I think that's the consensus. There's no ball. Maybe it's good for mental preparation. I would agree with that to some extent. But secondly, is that the game isn't played in lines, in straight lines anyway. It's dynamic. There's footwork movements and patterns that we use within the game that are not linear. Okay, so there might be zigzag runs, there might be crossovers of feet, there might be backtracking and then twisting and turning. So the question would be, do you need to use lines to be able to get all those physical activities out? And in the foundation phase, why would we even do that? We know that a child development in terms of, their ability to be able to have injury and things like that are of a certain age. So when you hit peak height velocity for a scientific term, we know that they're more susceptible to injuries. But we know at this very, very young age, players are durable. They can, bounce up and down off the ground quite quickly. So no lines for me is a big one, especially in the foundation phase. Hydration, something that we don't talk about enough in the warm-up. And it's something that we sometimes forget because we only have a 20-minute window. So why kind of waste it, if that makes sense? But hydration is a very, very good part of how we can start to scale our warm-ups. So if we feel that the getting a feel for the ball is quite a mild way of warming up, then great. We know that then when a water break comes, the next stage of our warm-up might be a little bit more intense and relevant to the game. So hydration not only keeps the players hydrated, as it says there, but it also allows you to have some breaks and just collect your thoughts within the warm-up. And again, it's just like a session. So in your session, would you allow your players to go and get a drink? Absolutely. And it's the same for the players in the warm-up. They need to be hydrated. And also from a physical perspective, they're going to be exerting a lot of water throughout the game. So we need to hydrate them before, because during the game, they're not going to be able to take on water as frequently as they would be able to in the warm-up. And there's a difference between hydrating, drinking a gallon of water, or sipping water frequently. So if you're telling them to warm up and drink before the warm-up and after, the reality is they're probably going to take on too much water at the beginning and then too much water at the end. but if we can manage their water intake throughout the warm-up, then they're going to have a better balance of hydration. Link your warm-up to the training. So if I've been doing a passing and receiving exercise within my game, within my weekly curriculum, then who's to say that I can't use that same practice, but in the warm-up? Nobody says I can't. And if that's our key focus and our key observation and communication for that particular match day, then why not link it back to training? So run the same practices that you've been doing, but in a microcosm, as I said before. So if you're doing a simple skill activity, maybe a rondo, 4v2, anything like that, or maybe some dribbling exercises, end zone games, 4-goal games, anything that you've been running in training, incorporate them into your warm-up. And then lastly, finish with some type of game. And again, that could be linked to your training. Why would we not prepare our players for the game by not letting them play the game within the warm-up? So if we're just doing runs and lines, and then we might get a ball out and pass a couple of times between us and get in a big circle and have 10 players and one player chasing, is that realistic to the game? No, I've never seen 10 versus 1 on a football field. But if we can then incorporate a game towards the back end of the warm-up to prepare them to what they're going to expect within the match day, then why not do that? So within that 20-minute window, it might look something like 5 minutes on ball mastery, things like that. Drink, couple of minutes, might be 8 minutes in a simple passing exercise or receiving or something that's linked to your training. Drink, rest, then 6 minutes of a match. And again, that could be 5 minutes of a match. Just depends on how many times they have a drink. And that will be, especially for this particular age, a sufficient enough in terms of their warm-up. So we played a game, we're starting the game, we're then going to we're coaching during the game. So there's a couple of key components that we need to remember during the game and while it's in play. The first one is the calm information. We've seen coaches, we've seen parents, we may have done it ourselves. And by the way, I've also done it. And depending on the age of ability, we might shout things that we may be overexerted or too loud or too aggressive. Our job is to be calm within these situations. The game is already frantic and more than ever in the foundation phase because we know what young players like. The ball is a magnet. They want to go straight to it. They run around like crazy. So if we're crazy on the sideline, we're just exacerbating the situation. Our job is to be very calm on the sidelines, and that can be linked to age and ability of the players. If you have a player and a group of players that are developing, and maybe they're not as developing as fast as you would like, why would we shout at them for giving a bad pass or a bad control? The same as if you get to the older age groups, you might be a little bit more direct and a bit more aggressive, but base it on your players and their ability. Do they have the ability to carry out what you've asked them to do? If not, then think about the way you're portraying that information. Linked to language, the information that you give them has to be short, concise, and very, very clear. Okay. So within the code of conduct that you have within your club, there may also be a philosophy within the club also. That's absolutely fine. But also within that, there should also be some level of terminology to what to be used within the particular team and club. So the information that you're giving should be decided before the actual season. So I'm not going to give long-winded sentences, information that is maybe too much, because we know when we're shouting information onto the field or giving instruction onto the field, if that takes us 3, 4, 5 seconds to be able to give that information, then the picture on the field for the players is completely changed. So it's redundant. It doesn't matter what information you've given them because it's already passed them by. And the second thing is that if you're giving information after the fact, unless it's information to be wary of in the future, then again, it's redundant. It doesn't make sense for us to shout that information on. So be short with your information, be concise with your information, and be very, very clear. And like I said, link that back to your terminology. So if press is a word that you use within your club, and that's something that you want to incorporate in the foundation phase and talking about the principles of play, that might be a key word, and that player knows exactly what to do. Okay, so short, concise, and clear. This links back to words and sentences. So again, terminology, do the players understand it? Can they incorporate it while they're playing? And is it short and concise? I think this is one that we can all resonate with, is don't kick every ball for the player. So for me, the way I interpret it, so this is a presentation that was developed by Martin, and I obviously supported him on this, was it looks good in the Premier League or in the MLS, but is it relevant for the foundation phase? So if Pep Guardiola is kicking every ball and being very emotional, well, that's the complete elite end of the game. Should you be replicating that in your foundation phase group of the under-9 players that you're dealing with? For me, no. You should be not kicking every single ball. You should be very calm, because it all links back to that situation that I discussed before, is that you're creating this friction between energy and energy, and then it just explodes. So for us, being a yin and a yang, a calm person on the side, but while the game is quite frantic and a lot of things are going on, be very calm on the side. Don't kick every ball. Be patient with the players.
I think just to add to that as well, Lee, we've got to remember that the match day is a learning experience for the players.
Correct.
It's a time for them to make mistakes and try to rectify them. If we're stood on the sideline and all we're doing is giving the information about how we want the game to be played at every moment, then we're denying opportunities for children to work that out for themselves. So when we provide the concise information at the breaks, then that's when we're relating it back to those moments where they may have made mistakes, but they can learn from them. If we're just constantly giving that information throughout the game, then it really prevents those children from working out how to do it themselves. I think some people call it remote control coaching. So we have to be able to observe, let them get on with it, let them look. Football is a game of mistakes, so they're going to make mistakes. They have to make mistakes, because if they don't make mistakes, they'll never learn anything. But if we try to correct every mistake as soon as it's happened, then again, they're not getting the opportunity to work it out for themselves. And there has to be a point in their early development where they start to work this stuff out for themselves, with support from those short, concise bits of information at the break or at the end of the game.
Absolutely. I think it's a really good point for everybody. I think the game is based off the ability to be able to execute a decision, so we have some technical frameworks that we use in the coaching manual and based off research that we've done within the company. So like Terry said, I think it's a very valid point that by not kicking every single ball, we're just allowing them to make those mistakes, but more importantly, make those decisions as well. So if we're making every single decision for them, then how can they learn? I mean, I'm just basically repeating what Terry said there, but I mean, for me, when a player asks me what they should be doing, I say to them, is this FIFA? Is this the video game FIFA? And they say no, obviously. Well, I can't control every single move that you do, so not like on FIFA. So go and work it out yourselves. And I think that relates to that point as well. And then lastly, it's about using information at the end of the periods and praising good play through Q&A. So we'll talk a little bit now about the in-period stuff which relates to that. So at the end of every period, we try to praise and focus on positives per player. So one positive thing that they've done. So you can ask them that question, or maybe it's something that you've observed and you want to communicate that back to the player. So praise them for what they've done well. And again, link it to the training. For example, Terry did a great pass in the first half. Fantastic. You've been working on that all week. Brilliant. So constant praise, constant information around positives that they've done in the game is a really, really big help, as we know, for children, because those ACEs that we're talking about, creating positive experiences, not adverse experiences and negatives, will go a long way in terms of nurturing. So another thing is using your time wisely, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in the next slide. Get the players in a position to make eye contact and see you. So the reality is that if you put them in most positions and ask them to look at you, they're going to make eye contact with you and be able to see you. However, there are lots of ways how we can do this. With young players especially, if you stand over them while they're sitting down, that is an intimidation tactic. You're taller than them by the fact that you're an adult and they're a child. And secondly, you're putting them on the floor and standing over them. It gives even more intimidation to the player. Okay, so think about where you're sitting or where you're standing. If the players are standing and you're standing, that's absolutely fine. Also, if they're sitting, you can also sit on the floor with them. There's nothing wrong with that. We're giving an equal opportunity for them to express their opinions and give feedback. But if you're not at the same level as them, then how can you do that? So it's a really important part of it. Next, body language. Arms folded, for me, no. These different types of body languages, mirroring and matching their body language, but be open with them. If they're sat down, you sit down. If they're stood up, you stand up. So all these things in terms of body language, just mirroring and matching things that we know work for players, then try to use the same body language as them or a positive body language. Feedback to the individuals in the teams based on their observation. So a little bit to what we linked about before about training and all these other things, but give them observations of what you've seen positive and also what you've seen, like they can improve on. But ask them the question also. So if they're giving you some feedback, maybe you want to encourage that particular piece of feedback, or less so, you want to ask them more questions about that. And I've written character in capital letters here. One of the things that we should never do is question the player's character. So if you're saying you're not working hard enough or you're not running enough, then for us, that's a very big negative impact on the player and on the child. You should never question the player's character, because they'll always think they're doing the best that they possibly can. If you question their character, the reality is that you're only going to get a negative reaction to that. And Terry will probably discuss that a little bit more after this particular presentation. And then use visual communication. So if you've got a tactics board, if you've got some pennies, if you've got cones, use those particular visuals to explain what you want them to do, or maybe what they can do as well. So, give them the opportunity to move the cones, move the tactics board and the little magnets on there to show you what they can learn within that second half. So if we just go back to time and about time, how important it is. The first 3 minutes of the team talk, if we base it off a 15-minute standard time, should be allowing them to take a drink and think about the game. This just allows them to reflect and, most importantly, to calm down based off that first half, because like I said to you before, it's quite frantic. So leave them alone for the first few minutes at least. Don't say anything. Let them take a drink. Let them talk to their friends. Let them sit down, whatever they want to do. Don't speak to them immediately. Let them just process what has happened in the first half. Then ask players what they think about the game. What did they feel went well? What do you think they can improve on? Ask them the questions. You don't need to give any information. So ask them leading questions. What did you think you did well there? Do you think you did things that we've been working on in training? What do you think you can do better? Because then you can give feedback to the individuals and the team based on what their observations are. Okay. So it's not you portraying your information or what you think has gone right, but you can just answer those questions that they've been asking or that they've been giving to you in terms of their answers, and just provide more feedback and more feedback. So it's that almost that peer-to-peer learning rather than dictatorial and me telling you what to do. And then the last, allow the players to refocus. For the last 3 minutes, it's very much the same as the first 3 minutes. Allow them to refocus on the game. And it gives them time to do that peer-to-peer. So you might even task them for the last 3 minutes of the half time. Talk to your teammate. It could be the 2 defenders, the 2 midfielders, the 2 attackers, whatever formation you want to play. But can they share information of what they can do better? And again, for them to go and execute that. So, sorry, this is the end of the game, not during the game. I apologize. So it's very much the same. So where you do this is really important. So do you do it on the pitch or in a locker? But again, concentrate on the positives as well as a general overview of the game. What went well, what didn't go well, whether you won or lost. There's always important information and learning that we can take from this. But again, ask them what they think they did well and what they didn't do so well. Give peer-to-peer feedback is a very powerful reflection. So what we do know is that players can learn off each other. So very much like we did in the halftime break, at the end of the game, they can ask each other what they did well. So again, buddy them up, let them talk to each other, let them reflect on some things that they talked about within the game, and maybe even feedback to you what they did well, or even at training, they can allow them to feedback as well. Encourage them to feedback with the coaches and the guidance of the coach. So again, it's very similar to the halftime team talk. You're asking questions, you're giving them information, but you're allowing them to feed back to you, not you feeding back to them. And this is kind of a unique part of the foundation phase where a lot of the answers and the questions, so a lot of the problems and generally the solutions do come from the players, not necessarily from the coaches. And for them, we know that through research that they're more likely to take that in, they're more likely to observe that information, and they can take that on board for the next training session in the game. And lastly, is get the parents involved. What's their feedback? And also, what if they're asking you questions about why did you play this way, or why weren't you shouting on the sideline? You can always relate that back to the philosophy, the code of conduct of the actual club or of your team. But get their feedback as well. What do you think your child did well? What do you think went well within the game? How do you think they can improve? So it's really important that you talk to the parents, the coach talks to the parents and the players. And it's that circular motion of constant feedback, constant information, and giving it back to the players. Because ultimately, all we want to do is develop the players to continue to love this game, really. So really important that you get involved with the parents as well. I appreciate your time, and that's kind of the end of the presentation. You know, it's not that long, but I think it's a lot of key information in there that you can take away. So if you do have any questions, myself or Terry are more than happy to answer them. So I'll pass it over to you, Ted.
Thanks, Lee. Appreciate that. Rob, do I need to hand over control again, or?
No, sir, you're all good to go.
Right, okay, good.
Q&A.
Can people just join in and ask questions, or does it have to be on the chat?
I will unmute mics now. So just for best practice, folks, if you can all mute yourself when we unmute you, but you're welcome to jump in with any questions you may have.
I'll respond to Joanna. Sorry, I don't have my glasses on. I'm just checking it's Joanna and not Joanne. In the chat box. Yeah, we're going to send a copy of the presentation. It's a good question. We're going to send a copy of the presentation over to Rob. I'm putting Rob on the spot here. So sorry, let me get my camera on just to prove that I haven't actually jumped into bed while the presentation's been going on. Yeah, I'll send the presentation over to Rob, and then Rob can distribute it to everybody who's been on the call. We'll probably just send you a Google link or something like that, Rob, because then people can download it and you don't have to send a 20 meg file to everybody.
Absolutely. Ian Mulliner has his hand up. Ian, what's your question?
Unmute. Talking to his computer. Ian, you need to unmute if you're trying to speak. It can't. It can't.
No.
Oh, we were not. Your hand was up for some reason.
I got no sound.
No sound for any of it. Oh, he can't hear us. We could hear you, Ian. So if you do come back, just give us a shout. All right. Okay. We could hear you then. Yeah, feel free, anyone, to ask any questions. I'm gonna give a little anecdote then about one of the points that Lee made in the presentation, and it's to kind of expand on the idea of criticizing character. I'm a coach, a volunteer coach, grassroots coach, as I explained at the beginning. I also have the pleasure of coaching my own son, which I dare say some of you will also have that experience. I've made that mistake of telling players they're being lazy, telling players that they're not getting, that they're pulling out of tackles, and probably the one who bore the brunt of it the most was my own son. And it's quite shameful, I suppose, but there were times in games kind of last season, bearing in mind they'd missed a whole load of football because of COVID, where I was giving this information out, not trying to be negative, but it got him upset on the pitch and he got really upset with me. Then I went through this presentation with Martin and I just stopped doing it. And the first game that I stopped it was in September when we were starting our season this year. And when he was working hard, all I did was say, "Brilliant work, Jones," because that's his name. When he won a tackle, brilliant commitment, well done. And in the same game, the other coach was doing exactly what I was doing beforehand, before I kind of had this revelation. And the players started arguing with the coach on the side of the pitch. I kind of thought, well, there, but for the grace of God, go I. But actually, since I stopped doing it, it has completely changed my relationship with my son on the pitch. He's actually improved an awful lot as a player because he doesn't have that pressure from dad anymore. So it's not necessarily that we think we're doing the wrong things here. It's just that trying to encourage people by pointing out their flaws has a counterproductive effect. So if there are any coaches who are parents on here who ever catch themselves doing it, I would just urge you to kind of see if you can stop and flip it and actually just encourage the good stuff from all of the players, because it's been, I've been coaching for 7 years. I've been involved in football for an awful lot longer than that. And it's completely changed me as a coach, just that one piece of simple advice. And to be honest, I didn't even know I was doing it before I told it. So it's a really, anecdotally, this presentation definitely improved how I behave on the sideline. I never criticize referees, of course.
Terry, a situation that many of our coaches are in is they'll be alone on the sideline. So they're managing players on the field, players on the bench, substitutions. How would you recommend handling the players on the bench? What types of conversations would you be having with those players?
It's a common thing. I hate it when I'm on my own on the sideline, because I know how tough it is. So the key thing really, if you're on your own on the sideline, is make sure you're organized before the game. We've got a coach in the team below me in the same age group, and he sends out to the parents before match day, he sends out the whole substitution structure for the game, believe it or not. I don't do it, but he sends a match sheet out to all of the parents, and it says, this is who's starting, this is when the substitutions are being made, this is who's coming off, who's going on, and he plans it out. And the reason he does that is that he is a solitary coach. So he gets all of that stuff taken care of before the match. And he really doesn't, he's under 13s football. He really doesn't veer from that. That doesn't matter what the result is, he sticks to it. With players, when they're on the side of the pitch with you, you want to try and keep them involved in the game. It gets easier as they get older because the competitive urge just gets stronger and stronger in players, and they don't get as distracted. So I have as much of a challenge with my players to keep them quiet on the sideline as I do to actually get them engaged. But with younger players, it's trying to, one good thing that I was told is that if you've got players coming on as substitutions, then say to that player, right, I'm going to bring you on for, at the beginning of the game, I'm going to bring you on for him. So I want you to watch what he does in the game or what she does in the game and think about what they're doing well, what you think you could do a bit better, so that when you come on into that position, you're ready to do exactly what you want to do when you get in there. And really see if you can just watch that one player. That works really well. So when they know that they're coming on for a certain player and they can watch that player, that can support them, support those players in keeping them engaged. If you've got the space, it always helps to have a bit of space on the side of the pitch so that they can, in the lead up to coming on, they can spend a bit of time warming up. And I generally just use technical stuff. But it's a challenge managing all of that information on your own. So number one, be organized, because if you're organized and you know who's coming on for who, then it allows you to do that other stuff a lot more easily. But that's probably, it's probably spending 15 minutes in the week in the lead up to a game, just creating the match sheet and deciding the subs. Now, the big challenge for coaches in doing that is that you're not chasing results when you do that. You make those substitutions at the times that you're going to make them, regardless of what's happening in the game. In the foundation phase, hopefully that's not a challenge because the result of the match doesn't really matter. You're trying to help these players enjoy the experience and gain from it and fall in love with the game. That gets more challenging as they get older. I had a game, actually I didn't have this problem last weekend because we only had 11 players because of various COVID and I think someone was asking a question about injuries earlier. My players are 13 now. They're getting injured. They're pulling calves. They're growing. So I had 11. I only had 11 players, but getting that kind of organization together, preparing well means that you can kind of manage it, but you need to forget the result. With my players, I even now at 13, my goalkeeper plays out for at least 25 minutes of a 70-minute match. So I don't want a goalkeeper who's just a goalkeeper. He comes out, and I do sometimes when it's a close game, I find it hard sometimes to make that change. But you've just got to honestly just do it. Just don't worry about the result. Just make the hard decisions, and if that means that you concede a late goal, so what? You've done the right thing for the players, and that's the important thing.
I think another thing, just going on the back of what Terry said about involving the players, I think what he mentioned before about, especially when they come into the back end of the foundation phase, so 10, 11, 12-ish, to have that kind of analysis of their position. So what are they doing well? What can they maybe do differently? But also, I think any player as well, the idea of allowing your players to be the managers in a sense as well. So, you know, what is the opposition team playing? For example, who's the best player? You know, what's the formation that they're playing? Even get the tactics board out so they can play with a tactics board to some extent on the sideline to be able to show you and demonstrate to you what is actually happening on the field, involves them. And I think, you know, as you know, games like FIFA and all these other games, you know, the players are playing them. You know, whether we agree with that they should be outside practicing more is a different topic of conversation. But, you know, playing with a tactics board is almost a form of that. So just asking them, you know, to be able to be involved, and even be the manager sometimes, I think is a really important part, you know, for them to take that responsibility and ownership on the field, I think is a great way of getting them involved on the sideline before you make any substitutes.
Appreciate that. Lawrence.
Yeah. Hey, Terry, I really like that idea of, you know, asking your players who are on the bench to look at what they might do once they go into position. And I think one thing that might be fun to add to that is ask them to observe their opponent and start to think about what are you going to do to beat or stop that player when you get in.
Yeah, totally agree with that. There's a thing of, there's a kind of a phrase in soccer called super subs. Lawrence, I don't know if you've heard of the idea of a super sub. It happens more in professional football, where there are certain players who seem to play really well when they come off the bench, and actually what they all describe whenever they're asked about that, Lawrence, is, well, the reason I'm good when I come off the bench is because I don't just sit on the bench, you know, sulking or waiting for my chance. I absolutely analyze the opponent's strengths and weaknesses so that when I come off the bench, I'm ready to do my absolute best for the team. So that's a valid point at every age, I think, Lawrence, with younger players, getting them into those good habits is undoubtedly going to benefit them in the longer term. Because it's not easy being a substitute, and all the kids want to be on the pitch, but we have squads for a reason, because we need to rotate them. So trying to get them into good habits when they're on the bench is a great idea, Lawrence, I think.
Yeah, another thing is that, you know, with the halftime talk, and you want to start to have them review their peers, you can actually ask them to look for things that the person they're going in for is doing well.
Yeah.
And then bring that up at halftime.
And the great thing about that, Lawrence, is that children's default position is to be overwhelmingly positive. So when you ask kids to give feedback on other kids, it just creates good vibes. Kids are really positive to their teammates. They're really positive to the opposition. I always find it really refreshing when I do that, because it reminds me that actually these children, these innocent kids, whilst they want to win, they want to enjoy that process, and they want to enjoy their teammates enjoying it, and actually they want to enjoy the opponents enjoying it. So it's a really good idea to kind of to get that peer feedback, analyzing each other and the opposition, because it creates good vibes in the squad. It creates good people. It creates good sportsmanship, and I think all of those things are things which soccer can teach every child that plays it.
If you do have any other questions, we'll stick around for another couple of minutes. So you can either unmute yourself or please type them into the chat box. Just like to thank Lee and Terry for a wonderful presentation. As Terry mentioned, we will get this out. We'll also have the recording posted to the website and emailed out as well.
And like I said, that I put a few links as we were going through the presentation, just to some. None of the stuff that I've posted is locked behind a paywall, so you can click on those links and go and have a look at those articles. You don't need to pay, but there's a really good one on something you can share with parents on the car journey home. There's a couple of great infographics about simple soccer language, which is universal, that you can use with children and also with parents. And I also put the match day article that kind of talks through some of this stuff in there. So by all means, I'll copy those links across to you as well, Rob.
That'll be wonderful. Thank you. Jay.
Hey there. Thanks for all the tips. I think this has been really helpful. I've been sort of gravitating toward using a lot of these in the past year or two, and definitely picked up some additional tips that I think will be really useful. My question relates to how do you deal with a coach, like a co-coach that maybe doesn't necessarily subscribe to this philosophy, is really good with like the tactical approach, but definitely needs some help with interaction with kids and how to get them motivated and how to reinforce and be positive with the kids. Any tips for how to deal with
what age group what age group is this for, Jay?
It's for under 10s and under 12s.
Right. Okay. It's a really good question, and the reason I said at the beginning around how we kind of see development being technique first, the laws and the principles second, and tactics third, is because I'm very acutely aware that there are an awful lot of coaches out there who think that tactics are the most important thing, and it is a tough thing to deal with. What I would say for a coach like that, and this is probably for you to kind of upskill your knowledge to a degree, is to go back to the principles of play. Look at the principles of attack and defense are they've been the same in soccer for decades. They don't really change an awful lot, apart from when the laws change. Now, those principles all apply to any tactical approach that a coach uses. So if you've got a coach that is focusing on tactics above all else, try and understand what that coach is trying to do with those tactics, and then see if you can relate that tactic back to the principles of play. So if he's talking about playing out from the back, think about how you're creating depth on the pitch, how you're creating width, how you're looking to penetrate with passes, and see if you can kind of say, well, I understand your tactical approach, fellow coach, but are we actually trying to play the ball forward quickly in this approach? And if that's the case, then that's what you teach the kids, because if they learn how to penetrate properly in the game, they learn how to recognize the best forward option, then the tactics become really simple. But with under 10s, teaching tactics is going to create you might have some success in youth soccer at this early age, because you'll have structure and organization, and it might help the players for 1 or 2 years. But I can say this with absolutely no hesitation, that in 3 or 4 years' time, when they come up against teams who've been taught how the game works properly, that tactical knowledge without a solid foundation of the principles is going to do them a massive disservice, and they will struggle to continue playing the game against teams who've got a better understanding. So it's equip yourself with the knowledge, and see if you can kind of work with that coach to relate his tactics to the knowledge that you can equip yourself with, because I think that will help you develop better players than simply focusing on tactics. And it's not cheating, but it's kind of like we play teams who played long ball tactics all the time. They used to beat us week in, week out when we were under 8, under 9, under 10, and they can't even get the ball off the team that they've been playing against. In fact, they're not even in the same divisions anymore. So it's you got to stick to your guns. Lee, go on. You're going to say something.
Yeah, I think there's two points. I think one's on the back of what Terry's saying there. We have to remember, especially within this particular development stage, is that we're only custodians of these players. So the tactics and everything, they're not irrelevant, but they do become less relevant, especially at this particular age group. So if you're, like Terry said, if you're teaching them a specific tactic, that's not necessarily teaching them the game, exactly what Terry said. So I think that's the first thing that I would say, is that we don't own these players. We're just custodians. We've got a small period, a small window of opportunity to support them in their development. So when they go to the next age group, or they try to get a college scholarship, or they just want to continue to play for the love of the game, you're preparing them for that particular moment in their life. And I think the second thing that I would recommend you do, Jay, is set the stall out early. And this can be your code of conduct, so on a match day, this is what we do. Do you agree with this or not? But this is what we do at this particular club, or me as a coach. And once you're honest and open with them about the conversation about what we actually do at training or on game day, you've got the buy-in straight away, and they're almost signing a contract to say that they're going to continue to do this. So if you know exactly what match day looks like for you, then just share that information with them and say, this is what we're agreeing upon, and come to a discussion and maybe a debate, but this is what we're agreeing on, and this is how we'll move things forward for the benefit of the players ultimately.
It's a tough one, though. It's a difficult conversation. Tactics are seeping down into the game at age groups that they don't need to be there. Tactics. When you're talking tactics, you're saying that players have got to have positions. So there's already a bit of a kind of contradiction in terms there, because everybody in every single foundation phase development model, whether it's Belgium, France, England, USA, they all agree that players should play lots of different positions. They should play every position, not lots of different positions, but you should not have a fixed goalkeeper, centre halves, defenders. You should be playing everyone everywhere. So in one breath, we agree that that's what development looks like for this young age group. And then in the next breath, we're saying that we're going to introduce tactics, which tactics by their nature defines positions for players, responsibilities for players, and roles for players. Well, that's kind of antagonistic to development, really, because it's not giving those players experience of every aspect of the game, which is what they really need. I mean, I can't tell you an under 10 is going to be a striker at under 10. I've got a striker at the moment who played the first half of this season at centre half. When he was 7, he was playing up front. I've got no idea where I'm going to put this guy, because he's got a left foot like a cannon. He's about 5'10", but he's learning the game still. So I've got to move him around to kind of give him different opportunities to develop. And I've been working with the kid for 7 years. I've been working with most of my players for 7 years. I don't know where they're going to end up on the pitch. And to be quite honest, I don't care, because I want them all to be able to defend. I want them all to be able to attack. And as soon as I start putting people in specific positions and specific tactics, I'm giving them roles and responsibilities that don't include all of those things potentially. So it's antagonistic to development, Jay, but it's a really tough kind of thing to deal with when you've got a coach who's adamant that tactics is the most important thing. I don't have that problem because the coaches I work with are just, they're good guys, and they just want the best for the kid. They're all their dads as well, so we all disagree and agree on pretty much everything that we come to on the game. But what we don't do is try and fix people in positions, because I just think it's certainly beneath the age of 13. It's not right. They don't fix people in positions beneath the age of 13, 14 in professional football clubs. So why we're doing it in development, in grassroots, is beyond me.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jay. What do you say to that, Rob? Do you have that experience of trying to deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, my son is 7, so it's a slightly different experience. My main battle is trying to speak with opposition coaches about not keeping 2 kids on the edge of their box for the whole game, or 3 kids, and so yeah.
That's a tactical approach, right?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. It's designed to score goals.
Well, we've got that. We've got people playing defensive tactics, or we've got people playing long ball football at youth development. Now, they will have very short-term success doing that, but in 2 or 3 years' time, they're going to have 3 or 4 players who just don't know how to play football properly. And they will, the biggest risk in this, Jay, is that by putting these players in these positions and not exposing them to how the whole game works and the real joy of playing lots of different positions, is that these kids get to 11, 12, 13, they haven't learned the game properly. They come up against players who have learned the game properly, and they just stop enjoying it and they go and do something stupid like play American football. I'm joking, but there is
but but Tez, this is also, sorry, just to interrupt you, but this is also an important point as well. Is this is, it's not just about tactics that we need to realize as coaches, physical development as well. So if you're overemphasizing the physical development of a player at 10 who may be strong and big and quick, and you're playing that player through a long ball, missing them in the field and not letting the footballer experience that because you might win a game, then it's the same concept, whether it's tactics, physical development. But so your job is to go on.
It's an interesting point because we talk about fun and enjoyment in the game. And those players who are playing at the back, there's not a lot of fun and enjoyment for that. Fun and enjoyment isn't about having a laugh and a joke with the kids all the time. Fun and enjoyment is about teaching them the game properly so they can go and do the game. They can go and play the game. Because I speak from experience. The reason I love football is because I can play it. And because I can go and I could play it as an adult. I could play with men who were, 14 years older than me at 16 when I started playing adult football, because I knew how the game worked and I never felt like I got left behind. So my enjoyment wasn't from having a laugh and a giggle and having lots of silly games. It was about the fact that I could play it and I could come off a pitch having enjoyed it because I did it right. I mean this seriously, if we teach kids to just do specific roles at an early age, we are going to kill their enjoyment of the game. By the time they get to 13, they'll probably go and do something else, go and play a different sport. And I know that that's a massive issue in US soccer, is that kids are exiting the game at an age when in the other parts of the world, these kids are committing to it for life. And all of a sudden we've had them for 7 years and they go out of it. And I think that that's not because they're not enjoying the experience that they've had. It's that they get to a point where the experience they've had hasn't taught them what the game's about. And that's when they stop enjoying it. It happens, it falls off a cliff very quickly, I think, at that age group. So for me, Jay, that's the biggest risk. And I just hope that people kind of just wake up to that really and kind of stop trying to take that approach, because it's frustrating, isn't it, Rob, when you're on the sidelines and coaches are doing it?
Yeah, it is. And it's not always out of a wanting to win. Sometimes it's an ignorance of not really understanding the game or so on. So it's on Mass Youth Soccer, it's on the coaching manual, it's on the people on this call to help educate those who are around us and around the game.
And we're really passionate about that, and it's a big part of what we do, because we do genuinely love this game, and we want the kids that are following on in the generations, even in their limited time, to fall in love with it, because it becomes a lifelong passion very quickly, this game, if you get it right at the early age groups. Joe, good question. If you go into a group of under sevens and ask them what position they want to play, about 90% of them are going to put their hands up and say striker. It's a tough one. You've got to encourage them to play different positions, in my opinion. And I've had this situation myself with the boy who was at centre forward and then went to centre half. How do you think that conversation went with him when suddenly he wasn't scoring all the goals, he was stopping goals? But I realized that he was becoming very one-dimensional as a player up front. He's gone back to centre half for a couple of years. Now he's playing up front again, and he's a totally different player. So I would have a word with the parents. I would discuss the issue with just discuss with them that, look, if I want to develop a really well-rounded player here, I can see that he's got a natural affinity for playing centre midfield, but it isn't going to hurt him to spend a bit of time at the back, seeing the whole game ahead of him, because centre midfield's very chaotic. You've always got your back to opponents. You never get the whole game in front of you. Equally for centre forward, you've got to understand how to get into space and get beyond people. So players do get fixed in positions. And unfortunately, actually, Joe, some of that does come from parents who say, my son's a striker, don't you know? And
I think I can.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, sorry, Tess. There's a bit of delay. I can't get my timing right to interrupt you. I think, Joe, it's a really good question, and Tez is right in terms of what you should be having a conversation with the parents. But especially at this age, you know, the best way you can do it is by linking that to their development. So I'll give you an example. If you've got a left back, so I was a left back, that's what I played. Standard situation, especially in that particular time, was you're left-footed, go and play on the left. So you became a left back or a left winger. Those are the two options that you had. But at this age, at under 10 and under 11, is if you find a unique situation, what the player can or can't do. And this example is, for example, if they can't receive with their back to goal and turn, then the best position for them to play is probably as a striker or a centre midfielder. So even if they're a left back, you're actually supporting their development. If they need to play faster football, so for example, play on 1 or 2 touches, if the player has the ability to do so, then the midfield then would be the best way of being able to practice those techniques in those situations, because you have to have a 360 view. There's a lot more people in the midfield, so you're going to have to play quicker. So the question might be is, rather than where you're excelling, is where are your deficiencies? Where can you improve? So link that back to the position, and then you might have different situations that they can improve on. And especially at 10 to 11, and Terry's right, the reality is we should only be looking at behaviours of positions around 13. So what positional behaviours do they demonstrate? So they demonstrate great crossing, you know, not great shooting, but they want to be a striker, then you might be more inclined to play them out wide. So it's just about just teaching them and coaching them about their development. And this is what might suit you for a short period of time. And it doesn't have to be for a season. It can be 2, 3, 4, maybe 6 months. And then you move back to the preferred position that you want to play. But it's for the benefit of the player, not for the benefit of the parent or the coach.
Excellent. Well, in the interest of letting Lee and Terry get some sleep, we are going to close it out. But again, thank you very much. Our next week's call is with NCSA, who's our college recruitment partner. That is a separate link. And then we'll be back on this link in 2 weeks' time with the New England Revolution and their new academy director. So we're excited. So thank you again for everybody for joining us. Really appreciate your contributions.
Guys. Cheers.
Thanks, guys. Cheers for your time. Brilliant.
Really appreciate it. Really enjoyed the chat.
Cheers, Rob. Thanks, mate.
Take care all. Thank you.
See ya.